it's nice to be on a panelist with people I consider to be friends, and you just posed me one of the least difficult political choices I would ever have to make if it's Tibi or Bibi to be Prime Minister. Let me also thank you. I mean, it's not as treacherous as it was over the last 2-3 days, but it's not exactly pleasant out there. To see a full room is really testimony to you all. Can I also apologise that I've got some childcare issues and I haven't been here for the course of today, and that's not a situation that I like to be in, so I apologise, I'm just here. And if I have to duck out for 2 minutes, please don't consider me rude, my co-panellists. Let me get to the easy bit, the impact of Trump's Jerusalem declaration and negotiations. And I say the easy bit because I am going to argue that Trump and his administration represent more change than continuity of American policy. But, and it's an important but, the negotiation process that we are a quarter of a century into of Oslo is structurally flawed. And when a Secretary of State by the name of John Kerry thought that by dint of his personality and his goodwill he could change things, there may have been some hubris involved there, but there was certainly a misunderstanding or a lack of appreciation that the negotiations are structurally flawed. Therefore, this is not derailing an otherwise potentially positive Israeli-Palestinian negotiation process. And I'll put it out there, and then perhaps we'll pick up on it later or not, but the core of that structural flaw is the asymmetry of power between Palestinians and Israelis. You cannot have two parties around the table so asymmetrical in their leverage and power, where the mediator, by the way, puts their thumb down on the scales in favour of the more powerful party, and expect a mutually acceptable, mutually dignified outcome from such a dynamic. Having got that out the way, let me try and touch on 5 points. First of all, how to understand the Jerusalem Declaration. Dr. Tibi has carried us a long way along that journey, and I want to perhaps continue from where he left off. How to understand that declaration and what it means for any plan. How does that impact? Because why does it matter? And it matters, I would argue, because of how it potentially impacts regional and international dynamics on Israel-Palestine, by a second point. Thirdly, how it impacts Palestinian dynamics, which I will literally touch on because others are more qualified to discuss that. Where I will dwell a little longer, and I will, again, pick up from things that Ahmed Tibi mentioned, is how did it impact the Israeli scene? And finally, I want to indulge in a little thought experiment on elements particular to Jerusalem. So let me get cracking on those points. I think that what I've come to kind of articulate as the best understanding of American policy pre-Trump is that the approach was to ask the Israeli side, rather quietly and politely, to do something that Israel had absolutely no intention or desire to do, to allow for a sovereign Palestinian state based on the 67 lines, with East Jerusalem as its capital, etc. Now, the thing is that the Americans made that polite, quiet request, while at the same time making unequivocally clear that if Israel said no, there would be absolutely no problem. The US support for Israel diplomatically, politically, financially, militarily would continue exactly the same. One should not therefore be surprised that the invariable Israeli answer was thanks but no thanks if it's all the same to you, and it was all the same to them. What's different today is that that polite, sometimes a bit uncomfortable question has ceased to be asked by the American side. The American position is, I would argue, fundamentally different. And I think that comes from a combination. If I were to kind of distill down some of the things that Dr. Tibi talked about, I think the contributing elements to where that position is coming from are, I think across the spectrum, there are different subgroups, sub-influencers within this administration who all row in the same direction, even if they're coming from somewhat different vantage points. And they are all ideologically predisposed to that, I don't think I'd call it a sweet spot, but by that median point between the Likud and the Jewish home that Dr. Tibby talked about. You have, on top of that, a degree of, they're neophytes, some of them. They don't understand the issue. So I think some of what some of the leading actors bring to this is simply a prejudice mixed with an ignorance, which ain't a good starting place. So I think one camp is the transactional camp. Everything's, I'm sorry to sound kind of trite, but everything is a real estate deal. And if they can heap onto whatever egregious political and territorial offer they are making to the Palestinians enough money from elsewhere in the region perhaps, and enough pressure and enough inducements and enough threats, then the Palestinians will simply say, well, we can't hold out. And I don't think this is going to happen. But the other groups contributing to this, which is why I think it's quite an immovable American position. Number one, Trump plays to his base. That is core to the way this administration functions, and it's true on this issue also. And important in his base are two groups. One is the dispensationalist evangelical Christians. They have a particular end times vision for what happens to the Jewish people, which it doesn't end well. Spoiler alert. But they have a deep support for the greater Israel, far-right pro-Israel camp. Secondly, you have the alt-right, the Breitbart folks. For them, the Israel-Palestine issue is almost part of America's own internal cultural wars. Some have even gone out and said, hey, what we want for America is simply what you Zionists want for Israel. We want a white Christian America. You're our buddies. You're our partners in this, ideologically. And of course it ties into Islamophobia and anti-immigrant culture, etc. And another important group, numerically far less significant, is that part of the American Jewish community establishment donor base who are Republican. It's a minority, it's about 25%. Some are just there because of a support for low taxes or social conservatism if they're coming from the Orthodox community, but some are deeply ideologically aligned with Greater Israel. And Ambassador Friedman is absolutely crucial in that respect, who's already been referred to, as is Sheldon Adelson, who is an important funder of both Netanyahu and Trump. I would say we do not have an American policy. I have not yet heard this administration ever talk about Israel-Palestine in American national interest terms. That's quite stunning when you think about it. We have a Friedman policy, not an American policy. So you put all of that together, and it's unsurprising that the sausage machine at the other end comes out with a Jerusalem statement, and perhaps more devastating than the statement was the subsequent tweet and the comment made alongside Prime Minister Netanyahu in Davos, where he said Jerusalem is off the table. What this means in terms of an American peace plan, of course, is, well, the word peace should be in very big inverted commas if we're going to use that term. What it means, of course, is that what we saw on Jerusalem will be replicated on every other issue. This will not be a peace plan. This will not be an attempt to put anything on the table that in any way even lends itself to being describable as something Palestinians could look at, let alone accept. Why does it matter then? And I would argue it matters because of the impact it has, A, within America, by the way, and I won't dwell on that, but and I don't want to get carried away either. I don't know if this is something Nadia will pick up on or not. I don't want to get carried away with this. But you are seeing a shift in the debate on this issue inside America because of the extremism of the Trump administration on the issue. Because Palestine, there was this phenomenon that those of us who toil in this particular vineyard call PEP, Americans who were progressive except on Palestine. So you were perfectly liberal, but then when it comes to the Palestinian issue, suddenly you believe in limitations on free speech if free speech includes sanctioning Israel, etc., etc. That is changing. When you have the most mainstream civil liberties groups out there campaigning against legislation initiated by the pro-Israel community to quash free speech on issues like BDS, that's a shift. It's also inducing shifts in the American Jewish community. The disgust at the closeness, ideologically and personally, between Trumpism and Netanyahu and the Israeli government is generating challenges that weren't there previously. But where else it matters is, very briefly, on the region, I think because of the nature of the desire to be part of this new old Pax Americana amongst some in the region, some in the Gulf, some elsewhere, who were very unenthusiastic about Obama, are often very enthusiastic about Trump, have decided that they can park or worse the Palestinian issue, you are seeing an attempt to reframe the issue in the region. I'm skeptical as to how far that can go. Part of my skepticism is the administration was stupid enough to put Jerusalem front and center. But it's a challenge. And what you also see is the international community, Europe, for instance, the British government perhaps most culpable out of any major European government, hiding behind the let's wait and see what Trump comes out with. We can't get too out of sync with the Trump administration. America plays the lead role in this. So this has also become something for people to hide behind. The impact that the Trump administration has on the Palestinian side, as I said, I will literally touch on. I think the core debate for Palestinians is between a defensive versus a disruptive strategy, as I've taken to calling it. And a defensive strategy is basically to say the power dynamics are so against us, the regional polarization is so acute, the challenges today are so immense that we hunker down and wait for better times. And you challenge things from within the status quo. And that is kind of the samud for today, which I understand. But the question is there also an opportunity that's being missed here? Is there a potential disruptive strategy? And how much can you succeed with a purely defensive strategy? And a disruptive strategy talks about some of the things that were mentioned already: equal rights, popular nonviolent civil resistance. We've seen the response to, and she's simply emblematic of something bigger, but Ahed Tamimi in the village of Nabi Saleh. So I think that's a question for Palestinians, but I'm going to cease to talk about that now and move on to my closing comments about the Israeli side. Because I think what might be interesting to look at is the extent to which Trump's position acts as an accelerator of a trend already in motion inside Israel, which is the following. The argument between those who say, and it's not really a Likud Jewish home argument, because many of the Likud are also in the second camp that I'm going to describe now, but I think for many people, and Netanyahu is probably among them, the status quo works. Why would you change a system for managing and controlling and entrenching your control of the Palestinians that has proven so effective? And so more of the same is the right way forward. I'm not saying these groups differ in terms of their end goal, but they differ in terms of their tactic. The second group are the folks who are in a hurry. And these folks are saying, we've won, the Palestinians have been defeated, there is a moment now when Trump is in power, and we must use every minute of having David Friedman as our ambassador. So we annex, we change dynamics. We create greater facts on the ground. Perhaps in Jerusalem also, how to remove the rights of more Palestinians from the municipal area. Can you break down, I think there's an Israeli attempt to, rather than having a Palestinian issue, which is difficult, you break it down into bite-sized chunks. So you have a Gaza problem, and Judea and Samaria, as they would say, problem. You have a Jerusalem problem. You have a minorities inside Israel problem. And you have a refugee problem. And I think there may be an attempt to break it down even further. So you'll have a Hebron problem, and a Jenin problem, and a Nablus problem. And there might even be an attempt to play in Palestinian succession issues in that way. Which one? That one's fine. So there are the folks in Israel who are in a hurry. And I think that's the center of gravity of the debate right now. And Trump is empowering the latter camp. Which theoretically, right now it only exists in theory, I have to say, theoretically could lead to an overreach which generates new vulnerabilities. If you told me, if I were here 5 years ago addressing this issue, and we went down some of the things that Dr. Tibi experiences every day in the Knesset, some of the things we've seen from Israel, and you were to say to me, all of that would have happened, but Palestinian strategy would have essentially remained static. The international position of Israel would have actually improved. I don't think we like to hear this, but if we're going to do an honest, accurate assessment of what one does, then Europe is essentially neutralized. Israel has unprecedented relations in the region. Just the ability of an Israeli prime minister to stand on every platform and say, we have better relations than ever in the region with the Gulf and elsewhere, and he is not contradicted. They don't have to visit Jerusalem West tomorrow, although they do occasionally send delegations, which the Israelis make a big deal of. But the ability of an Israeli prime minister to say that every day without being contradicted, the relationship with India, okay, it's BJP in power, but still, these things are significant. So what I'm saying is that the potential vulnerabilities, the potential overreach is not something that self-generates a new reality. That new reality will only ultimately be generated by decisions that Palestinians take or don't take. Finally, I said I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts on Jerusalem. And the first one is this. What Dr. Tibi described about the mobilization in the summer of last year, when there was the attempt to change the security arrangements at Al-Aqsa. The successful, non-violent, popular mobilization of Palestinians from Jerusalem and beyond, from both sides of the Green Line. The approach we just saw taken by the churches. Those were successful. Those were effective. And I simply put the question out there, and it's complicated. And this may sound like I'm making a simple point, but I acknowledge this is not simple. What does it mean that these things are more achievable in Jerusalem, where you don't have a Palestinian Authority, than in the archipelago of parts of the West Bank, where you do have a Palestinian Authority interposed between the Palestinian civilian population and the Israeli occupying authority? And my second thought is this, and I know all the reasons why this has not been done. The utilization of Palestinian East Jerusalemites who have permanent residency, who therefore have the right to vote in municipal elections, the question of exercising that right. Now, I know all the reasons why that has not been done. And as long as you hold 67 and international law, and that gives Palestinians very important tools, potentially, and in reality, in this conflict. And I know that it could lead to a backlash in terms of the challenges to people's residency, which is ongoing anyway. But are there circumstances under which that question should be revisited? What would be the trigger? Is it a change to an equal rights one-state thing? I don't know. I'm asking, what would be the trigger for revisiting that decision in a collective national way regarding Palestinian East Jerusalemites and the limited rights that they have in municipal elections? Thank you very much.